to Pediatric Speech Sister Saturdays. My name is Melanie White Evans. I am a pediatric speech language pathologist currently practicing in Oklahoma. I have here Phuong Lien Palafox. I'm so excited to have her on. The reason why I invited her on the show is because actually I reached out to her in, I believe it was February after Lunar New Year. And we know that there were some tragedies. I'm not going to go into it, but I already kind of knew that after the hype went down, everyone would kind of forget about the tragedies and people wouldn't necessarily be as culturally competent or culturally aware afterwards, just going back into the groove. So I wanted to bring Phuong on here just to talk about ways that we could be more culturally responsive with Asian communities in our profession. So Phuong, I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Phuong Lien Palafox. Pronouns are she, her. And I will say, Melanie, that I usually do not respond with a yes in terms of talking about my Asian communities all the time because it's a lot of emotional bandwidth. And I'm a highly sensitive, emotive human being. And in this case, I made a very intentional choice to have this conversation with you because you reached out with compassion and thoughtfulness and kindness, and that means a lot to me.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I do remember you saying that you don't normally say yes. So I really appreciate you taking a chance on me and coming out on this show. So, my first question, and I always ask guests, is what is your why? What's your reason for joining this field?
So I feel like my why has changed significantly in the last 2 decades. And so I would say that for me, I have been within and alongside school districts for 20 plus years, and I've served in various capacities and roles. And I think early on as a little Phuong, in Vietnamese, we call that Bé Phuong, like little Phuong. By the way, with the pronunciation of my name, there's two pronunciations. There's Phuong, which is the Vietnamese pronunciation, and Phuong, which is the Chinese pronunciation. So I will respond to both. But I think growing up, I wanted to find work alongside humanity, and I knew that I would be in some type of a teaching, empowering type of a space. I was a little quiet kid, so I'm not sure how this entered into my head and my heart. The one thing my father always told me was you've got to learn how to communicate because I get judged for how I communicate in this world. And so communication has always been this thin thread. And then one of my closest friends growing up in childhood, high school, early adult, is a person who stutters. And I think that introduced me to the field. And I think through his lens, it was a profession that gets to show someone that how they communicate is worthy and valuable. And I think the ability to be able to share your story, your wants, your needs, your, hey, I don't want this at all, is all we really have. And so that's my why. And I think I didn't go into the profession being really roary about multilingualism and humans of color. But this is where I am now. And I think as I went through the profession, and we'll dive more into this too, is that I always separated that aspect of my life out of self-preservation. And it wasn't until I saw the needs within my students and my clients where I was like, hold up, like what we're doing right now, this isn't okay. And so then instead of advocating for myself, which I usually just shut my mouth and, right, keep your head down, do your work, keep your head down, do your work. But when it came to other people that I was now also humanly responsible for, I got a little bit like fiery. And I think that's why I'm where I am now, because I don't know how I ended up being on a podcast talking about this.
Yes. Well, one thing that came to mind when you said that is I heard that there's a lot of healing in advocating for those things that personally touch us. So, if that is anti-Asian hate, and if you've always felt that, for me, it's anti-Black racism. And so feeling that myself coming from Oklahoma, and I've just always kind of kept my head down, or maybe not even have been that aware of it. But then now that I'm in the profession, I'm a lot more like, okay, you know what? A lot needs to change because we're all becoming affected by it and we're all becoming very miserable. So hats off to you. Hats off to you. I'm so happy that you're here.
Me too. I think you bring something up too about saying that it isn't until we see it within someone else and we name that other thing. Like I think sometimes self-reflection is hard to name it within ourselves, but when you see it outside of you, there's a name that gets attached to it. So, and I think we can't fix problems or make problems be better until you can name what that problem is, which takes safety, which is a whole nother issue. But perhaps maybe that helped both of us.
Yes, and I do actually I like how you mentioned safety, and I want to ask you this before I forget. How can we open up that safe space for our Asian colleagues and our Asian clients to even come to us? Because one thing that came to mind after the Lunar New Year tragedies, people, even myself, I had a Filipina colleague, and I felt like it would be even awkward to say, not, hey, are you okay? After what happened. So what can we do to make sure that they know that they have that safe space?
Yeah, that's what a thoughtful, intentional question. You know, I can only speak for myself. And then I can also share some of the experiences of other Asian American family members and colleagues as well. I know that for me personally, when someone reaches out, and sometimes even in the DM or the text or the phone call, it does sound awkward. What means the most to me is that you reached out and you said, "Hey, by the way, y'all, I my disclosure slide at the beginning of everything is that I'm a highly sensitive person. And so my eyeballs get wet every day. And I already know that it's going to happen here. So I'm just letting you know I'm okay with crying. If you're not, you can unpack that in therapy or by
Love that.
yourself. But so when we think about, when people reach out, it means that Fong's head and heart cross their head and heart because of something else. And I will say there's another SLP. She's out in San Diego, and I've never met her in real life. She's Filipina, but she reached out whenever there was a horrific story about a Vietnamese American father who was killed. And that story like just grumbled inside of me all week. And whenever she said, "Hey, I was just thinking about you about this," it meant so much. I think when we think about safety, Melanie, the thing I chuckle because we cannot say that a space is safe just by saying, hey, Fong, hey, Melanie, this is a safe space right now. And I think this whole idea too of allyship, and I only say this because of my own personal experience where I thought somebody was an ally, but it until the moment came down to it, it was performative. And so I think the first thing to acknowledge is that safe spaces have to be earned through you doing something to earn the trust of that human being, which in this case, we're talking about Asian Americans. So when you say this is a safe space, I want you to tell me about it. That to me is performative, period. Especially if we pull together a group of individuals who are minoritized and you say, this is a safe space. I want you to to unveil all of these things. And I'll tell you, even in doing this live right now, every time I get asked to do something, there is a part of me that is so nervous that someone will turn right around and sue me for X, Y, or Z. Now, is there something to sue me for? No, there's not. But there's a fear. Like there's a fear of, I don't know the system. My family didn't have access to a system. I don't know what the rules are, you know?
Mhm.
I feel like then if we think about trust, those things get earned in small moments without an audience. And so, how do we create this trust within our field to get these stories? I think it comes down to finding a way to earn the trust of our minoritized and professionals of color. And I think for me right now, within my scope and my corner of the world, where I see that happening the most are the current 8% that are using their own emotional bandwidth to say, this is so heavy. And it's both and. Hey, I see you. I see that you're an undergraduate student, a graduate student. How are things going? Or it's the Melanies of the world, or right now the Phongs of the world saying, all right, I know I've got some privilege here in this very public platform, and I'm scared, and I'm going to be brave too. And I'm going to talk about these things so we can at least name it.
Mhm.
So I don't think there's a right answer to that. But I do feel like that you got to earn those stories. You don't just get to hear our stories just because.
I want to ask you this too. Um, what is it, and just from your own personal experience, because I understand that you can't speak for everybody, but what is it, for example, when I reached out to you, how did you feel that intuitive, this person is genuinely asking rather than this person has a platform and just wants me to be on the platform?
Well, here's the thing, Melanie, is I acknowledge you have a platform and I acknowledge that you are doing your meaningful work. I also recognize where you are focusing your sacred efforts. And to me, it feels aligning. And so I think about, I mean, in this season of my profession, right, 20 years in, I have my own practice now. I have my own business. And so I am not accountable to anyone who has more power than I am up until September of 2020 when I started this practice. And so whenever you reached out, the things that you always bring to the forefront align so deeply with the things that I value. Now, our whys may be different. Our personal narrative for sure is different with some mutual experiences, I assume. But whenever you reached out after a lot of the ache, and it's been, I use the word crescendo a lot, but it's been a huge crescendo of Asian American hate with the advent of COVID and sentiments from leadership and people who are in front of televisions and giving society permission to say, hey, these things that I've been thinking and feeling, now that there's a public figure that is saying, ooh, you got to watch out for those Asian Americans. And we're going to just make them one big old monolith. We're just going to call them all Chinese, you know? Like we got to be careful and we got to be aware. For you to reach out, that was one. And you reached out with no intention. You reached out of compassion. Um, and then when you asked me to talk about this, I mean, I kind of go by gut, gut and energy.
Mhm.
I don't think we give enough credit to gut and energy. We put a lot of emphasis on science, and I love science. I love science. And science and research is behind on humanity. And I will say that over and over and over again. So that's why I said yes. And I'm glad I did.
I'm very happy that you did too, Phuong. I'm very happy that you did. And I also appreciate you sharing that, especially mentioning the gut and energy piece, because one thing that comes to mind, and a lot of this conversation is about allyship and genuine allyship. And so lately I've been getting a lot of feedback and, of course, kudos for what I'm doing, which I really appreciate. Kudos for what I'm doing, but also there's a lot of performatism too. People are doing a lot of performing. And so when it comes to the gut and intuition, I think that that's something that also has to be trained. I had to train myself in understanding, okay, this person isn't as genuine as they're presenting to be. Or if we're going to someone who's intending to be an ally, I just want them to know that we can feel it. We can feel if it's not genuine, and we pick up on it really quickly. So there's one situation where someone reached out, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so great. They're doing what needs to be done. And then, just like what you mentioned, you realize, okay, this person is not as genuine as I thought. And so when we're on the conversation about allyship, and this is kind of off topic, but on the discussion of allyship, I really just hope that people understand that we can feel when when the energy is not genuine because it's our experience. It's trauma that lives in our bodies, and our trauma responds to it. So, thank you again for that. My next question to you is, how can we be more culturally sensitive to Asian communities from your experience?
So for me, and because I'm going to assume that our audience right now are communication specialists, the majority of them educators, service providers, um, I think the first thing that comes to mind is this, idea of, like, I feel like our field, there are invisible linguistic classes that exist within our profession. And so this profession from the very beginning has been built on this very fabricated idea of what communication needs to sound like, needs to look like, right? And when we use words like professionalism and we use words like, oh, what is that? Civility, to say, hey, this is how we should be. But the thing, I mean, my father was a South Vietnamese naval captain, so he questioned every system all along the way, which is, I think, where I get it from. But I think about, like, why is it that we have, at one point, we're talking about ideas of English proficiency for our multilingual, speech language scientists? Why is it that currently, even now, for our Asian American professionals who are wanting to be in this field and who have thought for decades, this is the work that I want to invest in, that they are still being treated as if they do not have the communication abilities to work for us in the country of the United States of America, because we hear influences of their heritage language. And so I think, going back to this whole idea of naming something, we have to name what's happening right now. And right now, there is still discrimination against Asian American communicators in how we communicate, and our language, right? There's a continuum of it. So, and all points on that continuum are worthy and valid and meaningful. So I think recognizing that our field always centers the majority language, and I purposely say majority language. I don't even want to say English, because we, even in saying English language learners, we are still centering English, when in fact, what we should be doing is centering the needs of the child's heritage language and their family's needs. Because what helps build academic skills and builds communication skills, right? It's supporting that foundation, which also includes culture, which we don't invest in enough either within our work. So I think right now with our field, that, when we talk about culturally responsive and sustaining practices, it's really recognizing the things that have been going on, unveiling. I go back to this word of, it's time for us to unveil right now. And for those of us who feel safe enough to unveil, okay, that's where we're at. And then for individuals who say, well, I mean, is that really happening? You can't discount someone's lived experience. I'm not quite sure where we got into this whole idea of, well, that's not true. Well, someone just shared their experience. You can't tell Melanie that what she experienced wasn't true. What are some other ways for us to, I think it's thinking and feeling. I think it's normalizing that it's going to be uncomfortable. And I say all of this too, people, I think sometimes people are like, whoo, you're kind of in a season right now, because like the Phuong that always shows up in any type of public arena, whether it be a presentation or whether it be in a speech and language session and assessment, is I know exactly how I am being conveyed to the world. Like, I know I have big energy. I know I'm positive. I got you. Let's do some positive affirmations, right? And so I've always led with that positive beat. But then there's been a whole nother layer to it. And someone, a few years ago was just like, whew, what's going on with you right now? Like, why are you getting all mad about this stuff? And my response was, I've been mad about this whole entire time. But now I recognize that there is always power in a room. There is always power in a room. And right now, I recognize that I have the privilege of some of this power. And
Mhm.
so I'm going to speak out about it because I feel safer doing it now,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
Because everything I do moving forward is always, always tightly tethered to my previous experience or my upbringing in a small rural town in Texas or my experience as an Asian American undergraduate student, first in my family, graduate student. Didn't know I had to go to grad school till my sophomore year because I had no idea, right? And then pursuing a doctorate and being like, this space, I they're telling me I don't belong. And so I resigned, right? I
Mhm.
don't say quit anymore because I was working way too hard to quit. I
Hello?
resigned because that space was no longer serving me, or honestly, I think valued me.
Mm.
So I'm not sure if I exactly answered your question.
I think that there's so many things that you said that we can all learn from. I really think about, and you mentioned undergraduate students. I really appreciate how you even mentioned students because how do I even put this? It starts when we're students. Really, it starts as children in society. But as far as our space in this profession, everything is so felt and it really affects how we move forward. So, and I don't necessarily want to speak on behalf of my colleague, but I did have a Filipina colleague and we really connected as the only people of color in our space. And she was ready to leave the company, and one of the reasons that she said was she just felt like she wasn't valued, and she felt like that she had to work hard. She felt like she had to say yes to everything. She had this spirit of perfectionism that really just kept her from being fulfilled in the work, in just doing the work that she wanted to do, and she ended up leaving the field. And so, one of the things that I really hope that people listening to this and who continue to show allyship and really truly demonstrate it is that, like you said, these experiences are very valid. It's experiences that we have to go to sleep with, that we have to sit at the dinner table with our families with, that we have to pack our lunch bag and go to work with, and then also navigate with each other, navigate with non-BIPOC people who don't have the same experiences. And so I'm very happy that you even brought that up because I think that if you are not a minority, if you're not part of a minoritized group, then you're not going to have that same perspective. And it's easy to brush it off when you go through these things. We're going to talk about microaggressions here in a second, but it's easy to brush it off when you don't go through these things and say that's not valid, or what I said was just a joke, or you're being dramatic, you're being too sensitive. I'm sure you've been called sensitive so many times in your life. Yeah, me too. And so that brings me to my next question, Fong, and however much you're able and willing to share is what has your experience been like being in the field, showing up as an Asian American woman, and any microaggressions that you might have experienced and how you've combated them and navigated?
So I, for me, I will preface this. And I say this because people have brought it up. When I talk about microaggressions in the field, right? To me, there's nothing micro about them. They happen all the time consistently, right? Little paper cuts, but paper cuts hurt. And then you have so many of them where you feel like you're just raw all the time. The other thing that you just said that I really want to kind of note is when somebody is doing their work in the way that we expect within our profession, and let's say they keep doing their work, and then there may be a moment where there are big feelings that are expressed. If an individual, an Asian American individual, a minoritized individual, an SLP of color, comes to you and you were a part of the majority culture and says, hey, there's this thing that I've been feeling, is that know that when someone comes to you to share a part of something that happened that hurt them, that it is a gift for you to be able to hear that. One, because at some level they do feel safe with you. And take that and really sit in that space. Like what is happening to this person, and fully acknowledging that you don't have that lived experience. The other thing that I will say too is that when someone brings something up and it's what I call like this explosion of feelings, these explosions is not because of that one incident. It is always like a series, right, of all of these incidents that have happened in the past. So acknowledging that part. All right. So your question to me now is asking you were, what was the question, Melanie?
It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. Microaggressions in your own personal experiences.
I would say that in college, you know, I have this in a book that I wrote several years ago, where in graduate school, I love to write. Writing, I mean, I have things from like grade school all that my mom kept. Writing has always been my balm, my meditation, whether I realized it or not. But I wrote a report, and I remember, she showed it to me, and it was all red. I won't even dive into what we need to have within our educational leaders and how we mentor people, and it's such a privilege to be able to grow people in our profession as opposed to weeding them out. Like for those of us, the people who are trying to weed people out, that is not education. That's power.
Mm-hmm.
There are phenomenal educators at the university levels right now, fueling and feeding and empowering. And it is not about the grade, but it is about you learning, and I'm going to be there along the way. But looking at this report, me seeing all of the red, and her explicitly stating, specifically commenting on noun verb agreement, which I will say that I still have needs with at this time. Because in Vietnamese, we don't conjugate our verbs. Like a noun with a verb. Cool, you're good. Moving on with our communication. Figurative language is something that is hard for me. Prepositions, certain ones, people have made comments on social media like, oh, what she said was awesome, but she should have used as or of instead of in, or whatever it was. Like you should have replaced it with another 2-letter word. But when she showed me this report, she was like, well, you write poorly because English wasn't your first language. And I just remembered, I share this example a lot because it really stuck with me because I love writing. And was I supposed to show gratitude to be like, thank you for letting me know? Was I supposed to be like, oh, well, then maybe I'm just a bad writer moving forward and I never will be a good one? And, as a student, here I am in this space in a graduate program. At the time, the top graduate program in the nation, which I only went to this program. I applied out of ego. I wasn't going to go to this school, but they gave me a full ride, and it was an affirmative action scholarship, which honestly, Melanie, at the time, I was ashamed that I took it. But I needed that scholarship so badly because we had no money. We pulled out so many loans for my undergraduate. And I got into the college. I was like, cool, ego check, got into the top program. And then the department chair emailed and was like, are you representative of one of these groups? And he named several Asian groups. And I was like, actually, I am. 2 of them. Sign me up. And I was like, Matt, I got money. They're going to pay me to go to school. We don't have to figure it out. And I will tell you, speaking of money, because this relates to this topic, is that now I get the privilege of spending time alongside students of color. And you know what they're doing? Not all, but some, is that they're like, well, I just feel pressure right now. And I'm like, tell me about the pressure. Well, my mom and we decided that if I can not I can say 1 year of undergraduate and I just take more classes, I can save so much money. And it makes me think of my families, and I just think like there are students right now where they don't have a mentor in their family to guide them through the educational process, and we know it's a whole system, right? And on top of that, they're trying to save money, so you're trying to maximize, maybe it's 18 hours per semester as opposed to the 12. And I think, oh, money keeps us so stuck to so many different things, which is why I will say through my lived experience, I'm like, if we can provide a free education to anybody right now, do it. Just because I had to do it the hard way, I will not keep it hard for the people who are behind me.
Mm-hmm.
So there are those microaggressions. I remembered another incident where, and this the one with the writing the paper. By the way, I did almost 20 years later, I wrote back to that clinical supervisor because I'm having a hard time letting go of this story. And I know it's not, right? Therapy has taught me this. Um, and I told her I didn't need a response, but I wrote it out. And I just said, I just want to let you know the impact of your words. And it hurt. And I'm doing my best to use it as fuel to make changes so that this doesn't happen again. Or at least there are other professionals to be who know, like, you know what, those words, they don't represent you. They represent the person who said them to you. It's not you. Or it's, a couple of weeks ago, an Asian American student um, is at a university right now who's supporting her and cheering her on. But the university previously talked about her English proficiency and made sure that she knew that she had not yet learned the rules. And how horrible is that? That all she wanted to be her whole life, the minute she knew about our field, was to join this profession. You know,
Mhm.
the other example I can think of, Melanie, is I was doing it was a state presentation, and there may have been somewhere between, I'm bad with this, but between like maybe 500 to 800 people within this room. That was one of these long rooms that have like a long aisle down the middle. And
Mhm.
in a live presentation, I will always go into the audience beforehand to just say hi, thank you for coming. What are your pain points? Why are you here in this topic? And I speak to those pain points. If I can bring it back my content to address those needs, I will. So on this particular day, it was a summer. I went all the way to the back, and there were 6 men, all in business suits, sitting in the back. And I'm going to be really honest, with my own implicit bias, I was like, oh, this looks differently than my audience. So I go back there and I said, hi, I'm Phuong. Put my hand out. Thank you so much for coming. No one reached their hand out to shake my hand. I noted that first. And I said, I'd love to know about, why are you here in this course? What brought you here? And the gentleman who was right in front of me started laughing. And he goes, do you see us right here? The 5 of us, we're principals. And I said, oh, see that guy at the end? He's our special education director. He made us come here. And they all laughed. And he goes, in where we come from, we call this row like the back row, Baptist back row. And I was like, I grew up in Wiley, Texas. I have friends who went to the Baptist church. I know exactly what you're telling me right now. I understand. I understand that you sitting back here is you checking out. This is not important. You can fall asleep. You can do whatever. And so all of this is happening very quickly, right, in my head. And he's not even hiding it. He's saying this explicitly to my face. But I
Mhm.
still had a job to do for these other hundreds, whatever people. So I said, thank you for being here. I know time is not something we all have as educators. And I am hopeful that this content, and it was a course on under-resourced and underfunded communities and how we help our students, which then, of course, intersects with so many things that you and I are passionate about. And I said, I'm hopeful that this time will yield some meaning to you. Thank you. Because for self preservation in that moment, we are supposed to be civil and we are supposed to be gracious. So I was, and I walked all the way back up to the front and I did my presentation. And I just think, I don't know. My first thought was, wow, you lead schools full of children. And I know the demographics of your state, you know?
Mhm.
Um, so those are the experiences. And then, you get, comments. I get a lot of name microaggressions. That's which is why I talk a lot about names. It always has to do with language, names. I don't know how you speak English so well, Fong. I did a keynote for the state of Texas, and afterwards, a professional peer said, hey, I just wanted to let you know you mispronounced this word. So I do, there's a book called Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Hong, and
Mhm.
she talks in the book about how English is always out to get her. And I was like, oh my gosh, for the very first time, this is how I felt, but I didn't know how to put it into language. But I feel like the English language is always out to get me. And the reason why I feel that way is because my professional peers are telling me.
And really, it feels like an attack on your culture, on yourself, on your intelligence. Yeah,
All of it.
yeah. So I'm even myself, I'm holding back a lot of emotion because it's very hurtful. So, like you said, someone who's so excited as soon as they found out about this field, they want to be here. They already, just like yourself, jumped through hoops to get in the field financially. For some people, it's a lot easier. And even being a minority, there's already that barrier there. Um, I like how you mentioned names. So I did want to bring that up. On your Instagram, you do mention names and the beauty of names, especially Asian names. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how we can be more sensitive when pronouncing Asian names and even just simply asking how do you pronounce your name without
Yes.
off as rude?
Yes. So first I will say, so my name, Phuong in Chinese, Phuong in Vietnamese, was given to me. And it was given to me after I was born, which was after the Vietnamese War. My dad fought for South Vietnam. Then they asked him to navigate a boat full of people, what we refer to now as Vietnamese boat people. So he did
Mhm.
it, him and my mother, across the South China Sea, across weeks. Finally, they ended up in Hong Kong because Hong Kong had their borders open. Other countries were saturated with Vietnamese refugees, right? 200,000 to 400,000 Vietnamese refugees died in the South China Sea due to no food, no water, pirates, things that we will not talk about on this podcast. And they survived, every single person. My dad made sure that everyone survived. And then the day they arrived at 3 a.m., I was born. So Phuong means going in the right direction. So that's what my name means. Now, my mom has always been very intentional about reminding me, you know, your name means going in the right direction. B, you know your name, which is my nickname at home, but B, you know your name means the right direction, right, Gong? Right, little one? Now, my mom passed away during my first year in the profession. So, and I think about her all day long, every day, all day, which is usually why I'm crying about things. So, you know, she named me, she kept my name. My sister's name, she was born in Whitewater, Wisconsin. Her name is Kim. And then my brother's name is Young, which is Dan. So there's Phuong, Kim, Dan. Now, at some point in my childhood, my mom was like, do you want to change it? I think we should change it to Pearl. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, I was like, I like my name, even though kids made fun of it, even though, you know, it was like Fong, 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 Fong with Cisco days. It was, I had a teacher that called me Fawn. I mean, like, you know, all the things. And my name is misspelled often. Even as I, you know, get up on a stage to do a keynote, and there it is, you know, my name is misspelled. Um, so, what are some things that we can do to support Asian American names? The first one is ask how to say the name. Hey, just like before we started right now, Melanie, you were like, hey, could you say your name for me? Now, here's the thing. Let's say you said it and it was still incorrect. Keep trying. I always say the honor is not getting it right the first time. That's not it. The honor is not even not getting it wrong. And I think some people are like, I'm just not even going to try to say it. Like people will say that to me, like, I'm not even going to try. So they're like, oh, what's your name? And I'm like, Fong. Ooh, not going to try to say it. The thing that's interesting, because I'm a speech language scientist, is I'm like, can you say song? Well, then you can say Fong. So that's not you, not your inability to say it. That's you not even caring enough about the person to say their name. So let's really acknowledge what's happening. So ask, how do you say your name? And then second, right, you're going to try again. And you can say in these moments, I'm so sorry. I'm going to keep practicing because your name is important and I want to get it right. Thank you so much for your patience with me. That feels very differently than me giving my driver's license, to go into a school so I can do an assessment for a Vietnamese student and then being like, whoo, not even going to try this. Well, ask me. But now, because I'm in the space that I'm in, if somebody says, ooh, I'm not even going to try, I'll say I'm an educator. Let's say it together. Phuong. It sounds like song. So I'm helping them. I know I'm helping them at this point, right? Like I'm giving them tips.
Mhm.
Phonetically, it's like Fong. And in those moments, I do check myself all the time. I'm like, am I being snarky? Am I being rude? And sometimes I don't. I just go on with it. The one story that stands out to me is I did the most civic duty I could do, which is go vote a couple
Yes.
of years ago. And you have to give your driver's license. And this woman goes, oh, interesting name. Let it go. It was on my lunch break. I don't have a lot of time, anyways. I was working in a clinic at that time. Moving on. Da 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 da. Really, your name is so interesting. So then I'm like, okay. And I said, well, for my family and my culture, my name is actually common. That's all I said. Said it calmly. Well, I think that was overstepping her boundary, right? She could give me comments about my name twice about how interesting. And when she said interesting, I know what the connotation is. How weird, how strange. Do you belong here? Less than my name, less worth. So I said my part and I said, it's actually a common name. It doesn't matter if it's common or not, whatever. And she leans in and she goes, well, where I come from, it's interesting. Ooh. So I
Oh,
get it. Melanie. So I'm voting. She's the voting volunteer. So I get in line and I just tears, crying. And so what are the tears saying? The tears are saying that my name means so much to me. And my mama gave me that name. And she carried me in her womb because I was the only hope she had, and we kept each other alive on that boat. So I voted, and I remembered there was a gentleman behind me, and he's like, are you okay? Are you okay? And I was like, so I go and I vote, and I made a choice because here is the privilege that we have. Sometimes when we feel safe, sometimes when we kind of feel safe, or sometimes we just do it. So I get back in line. To go vote again, but I just needed to talk to this woman. And so then at this point, the volunteer people are noticing that I'm getting back in line to vote again when I just got done voting. So one woman comes up, is everything okay? I just need to talk to, and I said her name because I saw her name on her name badge. They were like, oh. So then I see them whispering back there. So then they send another person. Now, even in that moment, Melanie, I knew my privilege as a petite Asian woman waiting in line, wearing professional clothing. And I know that if I was somebody else with different pigmentation, with a different gender identity, it would have been a different story. And I know this, but I had privilege in that moment. I know I did. So then, so a total of 5 people came up to me. Just need to talk to her. I just need to talk to her. So they let me get back up to her. And I'm sure they were like, is this woman gonna and I get down to her level because I learned this as a speech language scientist. You get down to and I said, let's call her Vicky. I said, Vicky, I just want to let you know that the way that you said that my name was interesting multiple times was hurtful. And that you said where you come from, that it was an interesting name. I just want to let you know that truly did hurt my feelings because my mother gave me that name for a very important reason. And this is all I want to say. And her response was, well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, which, remember, apologies are not about the intention. True apologies are about the impact. So I talk a lot about names. And just recently I was at a university where I don't know if whenever I say, hi, what's your name? Asian Americans will say to me their name. And then they'll say, but call me Sally. Oh, just call me Lucy. And they'll fill in with an anglicized name. And I said, well, what do you prefer? So that's another strategy. What would you prefer to be called? And then if they say it's up to you, I say their heritage name. And I may not be able to say all of the sounds because I know Vietnamese. My mom knew Mandarin, my mom knew Cantonese, and there are sounds in Mandarin and Cantonese that are challenging for me, but I will keep working on it. And I will try and I will try and I will try because that person is worthy. And the way that I always see it, I say names are important because it is the name of the main character in the story that human being is living, has lived, is currently living, will keep living. So I'm going to get the names right or keep trying and trying and trying. But I see so many lovely, beautiful Asian names get completely annihilated and pushed under and pushed aside for the ease of our communicators. And just for the record, communication is a two-party entity. And somewhere along the way, I'm going to say that within my experience within this country is that we have said, you know what? We need to communicate always for the ease of the majority language and the majority culture. And that's not true. Communication is a two-way entity. And if you are not receiving the message that someone is giving, if you did not misunderstand something, it is also your responsibility to do something to help that moment. It is not just up to the multilingual individual who, by the way, knows 2 or more languages. We cannot judge people who have more skills than us when we have a singular language, but say it is your problem and not mine. That again goes back to ego and power. That has nothing to do with communication. And it's interesting for me that for those of us who have had the privilege of traveling to other parts of the world, it's amazing how much we can communicate without reliance upon a mutual speaking language. And nowadays with technology, there are so many different ways for us to get our messages across. But if you're not willing to put in the effort to do any of those things, that has nothing to do with communication. I feel like that's just someone being a jerk. That's my technical term. You're being a jerk face.
One thing I'm trying to circle back because there's a thought. Your mother, the fact that you mentioned 2 other languages that she speaks. And I'm just thinking, wow, how powerful is that? She spoke 3 different languages. And it's
So
crazy.
no, 4: Vietnamese, Mandarin, Cantonese, English. Language was something that I do feel like there was an ease with language with her. So I grew up in, a home where we went in and out of languages. I would hear things. I can recognize Mandarin and I can recognize Cantonese. I just don't know I don't know what the vocabulary is. And then my dad speaks French and also those languages as well. But languages, it's.
Wow. And I just think about how, of course, people look at people who are multilingual as lesser than, when really they might be some of the smartest people on the planet. So hats off to mom. So I do want to get into your book. You are working on your sophomore book, and I also want to hear about your freshman book too. Can you tell us a bit about your creative projects?
Yes. My first book that was published is called the Heartbeat of Speech Language Pathology. I wrote it in 2019, and I think primarily I wrote it for the 22-year-old version of me. So being in the field at that time for almost 20 years, what are some things that I wish I would have known moving into the field? And I would say the book, the vocabulary it's not like a technical book, but it's more of a lived experience book. But I talk about how we need to listen to our students and clients' stories and lived experiences. That's a part of our evidence-based model. I talk about multilingual needs and how we support that. I talk about overwhelmed school-based speech language pathologists, because I think so often we think about the people we serve, we support, we empower, and then we forget about their biggest resource, which is us. And there's not enough advocacy for us. So that's the first book. I also will say that, you made me complete disclosures for our mutual time together, but I do not receive any royalties from that book. Currently, I am working on my sophomore book, and so far, since September, once a week, I will dedicate a few hours to writing it. And it is about multilingualism and different aspects of how medical professionals and educators and people who own businesses, everybody in the world can pick it up. And I want it to fuel their head and their heart in terms of how do we move alongside a multilingual humanity in ways that we could support and empower them. So of course, there's like a chapter that's very technical on, okay, well, let's think about how there are influences of a heritage language on the majority language, and that is very okay. And that does not mean that it's a disorder. Multilingualism is not a pathology. Bilingualism is not a pathology, despite the fact that I do think in our field right now that there is a tone that it is. So I won't dive into that. That's a whole couple of days courses. So this book, as I was writing the chapters in this book, I realized that there were so many stories from little Phuong's life and teenage Phuong and adult Phuong's life. And so I started weaving those stories in. So I'm going to say that I actually submitted it to a publisher right now. We'll see what happens. And if they decide not to publish it, I will self-publish it myself. But that is my intention, is to have a book that's not a scientific book about the rules and the guts and the contrastive analysis and all this stuff. I want people to think about it, but first I want people to feel, which are my stories. And so, and I want to bring humanity back to people who communicate in a language, both verbal, and I know that we've been centering speaking language, by the way, in this. And that's a disservice that we've done to our non-speaking humanity. But that, what are the ways where we can truly support, empower, propel multilingualism? And I also think the other sentiment that I have for this sophomore book, which at this time is going to be called The Heart and Head of Language. We'll see. I might change that. Is that I've learned that in doing trainings for school districts and state organizations on culturally responsive assessments, I have witnessed and observed afterwards when multilingual and bilingual educators, service providers, medical professionals, students come up to me afterwards who were bilingual, bicultural, crying. And they're like, I didn't realize all of the heavy I was carrying doing this work. And I think that's really something to acknowledge, Melanie, is that for you and for me, as minoritized members of this profession, when we are doing our work, it is not just about the work. It's about all of the living that we have to move through and navigate through. And then we are providing that overflow to educate others around us. And I think that's why just because we do it well doesn't mean that weight isn't so heavy, because it's not just about the work. It's about my whole life. Like, that's why I'm so passionate about this. So we'll see. I visualize things a lot. So I want the heart and head of language, heart first, then head, to be within our hands. I already created the cover, so I know what it's going to look like in 2024. So that's my goal. So I'm saying it out loud, like this is really live, because it legit is live. So y'all can keep me accountable to that.
Well, congratulations on your second book. One thing I want to mention is I want us to separate anger and passion. They're not the same thing. So you mentioned how someone was like, oh my gosh, why are you so angry? Let's take anger out of the vocabulary, especially when we're talking about BIPOC people, because one reason why it's so hard for us to speak up and speak out against microaggressions is because we get painted as aggressive. Oh my gosh, she was so angry. Passionate. this is your life. This is your work. These are things that literally run through your DNA. And like you said, these are connections from lived experiences that you have. And I'm sorry, you saying that my name is interesting just brought up a trigger from when I was a little girl and that I kept experiencing through the rest of my professional career. So I just also want to put that out there. You're not an angry Asian woman. You are a passionate Asian woman. And I'm very happy that you are here. I don't want to keep you too long. We are almost at an hour. But I do want to ask you, what changes would you like to bring to the profession? What changes do you hope? Let me rephrase that question. Not that you would like to bring to the profession, because it's not all on Phuong, but what changes would you like to see in the profession moving forward?
I think the first one is for those of us who feel safe enough to continue to unveil. We got to name the need. That's the first thing. The second thing that I would like changed is for us to recognize the representation and recognize that it needs to be changed. So if we are in a space where the topic at hand is being discussed and the individuals who are having that lived experience is not there within that space to contribute to those conversations, then you need to make those changes. I feel that it's very important, Melanie, that even despite all of the things that we unveiled today within the last hour, is to recognize that quiet and bold change is happening. And I can tell you that in going into school districts and talking at universities and communicating with state organizations, there are people who are boldly and quietly advocating within their corners of the world to bend our field toward justice, but we may not see it. So often, whenever there are days that feel dark and heavy, I remind myself and I tell people, like, know that there is so much good work. There are the university professors who are investing in our students of color. There are clinicians and school district personnel, speech language scientists who are doing culturally responsive reports where they earn the family's trust and they put in that qualitative information. There are those who are speaking up and out and communicating their lived experience, right? And sharing that. And then I think the last thing that I want us to change in our profession is I feel like we all need to go back to our own personal peace. And so as we do this work, which is heavy work, meaningful work, emotional work, is that we have to sustain ourselves for our own preservation, for us to be the ancestors that our future profession needs. And that requires us to sleep and to rest and to say, no, thanks. I don't want to answer this question right now. I don't want to be on your panel as an SLP of color because I'm tired. And I'm going to meditate. I'm going to have my plants. I'm going to focus on my family because these are my VIPs. And that's my advocacy, to be like, can't take that joy away from me. You can't take this away from me. This is the one life I get to live. And it means a lot to me. But systems will keep taking from you. They will. So we have to recognize that as well. So I think those are some of the things that I would like for us to prioritize at the front of our heads and hearts.
Well, I do want to say we do have Anne here, and she just said, thank you so much for this episode. She says, hello to you. She says, I'm appreciative of you both. It's validating to know that I am not the only one carrying similar weight in my heart in this field.
There is a lot of healing that happens when you find people who see you. So I think that's what you do, Melanie. That's the work you're doing, is to have people be seen.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that validation. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you, if they want to purchase your first book and then your second book when it comes out in 2024? Where can people find you?
You can always email me at connect@PhuongLienPalafox.com. I will say I am not the best with DMs, and I do that. That's a boundary that I have on purpose. So you can always find me there. I'm kind of always around. So, yeah.
Well, I'll be sure to, when I post this replay, I'll be sure to put that in the show notes and the link to your first book. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is Pediatric Speech Sister Saturdays Live. Thank you, Phuong, for coming. Be sure to join us next week where we'll be talking to Nikki from Teach Speech 365. We love her. All right. Thank you all so much. And